Part 1, The Anatomy of a Bad Bet. You spend 40 years in medicine, and you think you've seen every imaginable way a human body can fail. You learn the smell of kidney failure, the specific, quiet panic in a patient's eyes when their heart starts to flutter out of rhythm, and the exact shade of gray a face turns when time is running out. But nobody ever teaches you the scent of a financial slaughter. Nobody prepares you for the cold, calculated rot that happens when medicine climbs into bed with Wall Street. My name is Dr. Arthur Vance. I'm 62 years old. For 3 decades, I wore a white coat as the chief of thoracic surgery at Manhattan General, and later, as the chief medical officer for a massive, multi-billion-dollar biotech fund called Vanguard Apex. To the boys in their tailored Zegna suits down on Liberty Street, I was just the doc. A prestigious ornament on their board of directors. A token gray-haired authority they trotted out to reassure investors that our medical portfolios were sound. They thought I spent my days reading golf magazines and rubber-stamping their aggressive pharmaceutical investments. They thought the old man was asleep at the wheel. But 3 days ago, a single, anonymous PDF arrived on my encrypted terminal at 2 a.m. It was a restricted, Phase 3 clinical trial log for a revolutionary new blood thinner called Thrombostop. It was supposed to be the holy grail of cardiology, a drug projected to rake in $4 billion in its first year alone. Vanguard Apex had bet the entire house on it. I didn't look at the projected profits. I looked at the raw patient data. Column 42. Row 912. A tiny, almost imperceptible spike in hepatic enzyme levels exactly 48 hours after dosage. To an ordinary accountant, it looked like a rounding error. To me, it was a death warrant. I didn't sleep that night. When you've held a human heart in your gloved hands, you develop a zero-tolerance policy for errors. By 6 a.m., I had cross-referenced that rounding error with the trial's raw mortality data from Eastern Europe, places where corporate oversight gets real blurry if you grease the right palms. The math was chilling. Out of 4,000 trial participants, 14 had died of sudden, massive internal hemorrhaging. 14 names erased from the ledgers, buried under a mountain of falsified pre-existing conditions. At 8:30 a.m., I walked straight into the penthouse office of Julian Cross. Julian is 42, has teeth whiter than a hospital sheet, and runs Vanguard Apex with the cold, unblinking intensity of a predatory shark. He was standing by his floor-to-ceiling glass window, looking down at the New York Stock Exchange like he owned the concrete it was built on. I slammed my iPad onto his glass desk. "We're halting the Thrombostop launch, Julian. It's killing people. The hepatic enzyme spikes are causing acute vascular breakdown. I want the FDA notified by noon." Julian didn't even turn around. He just took a slow sip of his green juice. "Arthur. Relax. Take a breath. You're looking at unadjusted data from old batches. The refined compound is perfectly safe." "Don't lie to me, Julian," I said, my voice dropping an octave, losing all its polite bedside manner. I ran the lot numbers. These deaths happened last month. And yesterday afternoon, you personally authorized a $60 million short position on our own stock through an offshore shell company in the Caymans. You know the drug is a lethal bust. You're setting up a pump and dump, and you're going to let the public bleed out while you ride the crash to a golden parachute. Julian finally turned around. The charming, youthful smile he used for CNBC was completely gone. His face hardened into an expression of pure, unadulterated contempt. He didn't deny the Cayman accounts. He didn't even try to defend the drug. When you have $60 million on the line, you don't waste time on ethics. "Let me tell you how this actually works, Arthur," he said, walking slowly toward me until I could smell the expensive mints on his breath. "The FDA approval is locked in. The press release goes out at opening bell tomorrow. If you open your mouth, if you breathe a single word of this unverified garbage to a soul, I will ruin you. I will strip you of your medical license, revoke your pension, and tie you up in non-disclosure lawsuits until you're too broke to pay for your own funeral." He leaned against his desk, crossing his arms. You're an old man, document. You had a good run in the operating room, but this is Wall Street. We don't save lives here. We manage risk. And right now, you are the only risk I see. Go home. Play with your grandkids. Let the adults handle the market. I looked at him, and for a second, I felt the heavy weight of my 62 years. My knees ached from decades of standing over surgical tables. It would be so easy to just walk away, take my comfortable retirement, and look the other way. But then I thought about those 14 names in Eastern Europe. I thought about the thousands of American patients who would fill their prescriptions tomorrow morning, trusting the white coats. You're right about one thing, Julian, I said, picking up my iPad and looking him dead in the eye. I am an old man. Which means I have absolutely nothing left to lose. I turned around and walked out of his glass tower. The war had officially begun. I went straight back to my brownstone in Brooklyn, locked the front door, and immediately got to work. If I was going to bring down a predatory wolf like Julian Cross, I couldn't just play the role of an outraged doctor. I had to use his own weapons against him. I needed the full, unredacted laboratory logs from our primary research facility in New Jersey, the raw, digital files that contained the chemical fingerprints of the thrombostop cover-up. I picked up my phone and called Dr. Evelyn Reed. Evelyn was 38, a brilliant hematologist, and my former protege whom I had personally hired to run the Vanguard labs. She was the one scientist in that entire corporate machine I trusted implicitly. Arthur, she answered on the second ring, her voice tight, hushed, and trembling. I heard what happened at the penthouse. Julian's assistants are already clearing out your office. Where are you? I'm home, Evelyn. Listen to me very carefully. I need you to download the raw spectrometry logs from the May trials. The ones showing the hepatic breakdown. Put them on an encrypted flash drive and meet me at the diner on 4th Avenue in an hour. There was a long, suffocating silence on the other end of the line. All I could hear was the faint, rhythmic beep of a laboratory centrifuge in the background. I can't do that, Arthur, she whispered. Evelyn, this isn't about corporate politics, I said, my voice rising with urgent gravity. People are going to die tomorrow morning. They're already dead, Arthur, she said, her voice suddenly turning cold, losing all its frantic panic. And I'm the one who signed off on the revised data sheets. Julian bought out my research firm 3 months ago. My career, my funding, everything is tied to this launch. I'm sorry, document. You should have stayed retired. Click. The line went dead. The betrayal hit me like a physical blow to the chest. The rot wasn't just at the top. It had poisoned the very well I helped dig. I stared at my dead phone, the silence in my empty brownstone suddenly feeling incredibly heavy. Evelyn was gone. The lab data was locked behind a firewall of corporate betrayal. By tomorrow at 9:30 a.m., the opening bell would ring, the stock would soar, the lethal prescriptions would ship, and Julian's $60 million trap would spring shut. But if 40 years in medicine teaches you anything, it's that when a main artery is blocked, you don't just sit there and watch the patient die. You find a collateral pathway. You bypass the obstruction. Julian and Evelyn thought everything was digital. They thought because they had locked me out of the Vanguard mainframe, I was completely paralyzed. They forgot that I was a surgeon who began his career before the internet even existed. We didn't keep our most sensitive autopsies or tissue anomalies on a cloud server back then, we kept them on physical, microscopic glass slides. 3 months ago, during the very first batch tests of thrombostop, the lab had sent 3 liver tissue biopsies from deceased test primates to Manhattan General for an independent pathology review. Because it was an external consult, the hospital's pathology department had archived those physical slides under a blind, anonymous tracking number in the basement vaults of the hospital. I grabbed my coat, walked out into the cool evening air, and flagged down a yellow cab. I didn't call ahead. I didn't use my electronic staff ID card, which Julian had undoubtedly deactivated by now. Instead, I walked through the emergency room entrance of Manhattan General at 11 p.m., wearing a faded blue scrub top underneath my winter coat. To the overworked, exhausted night shift residents, I wasn't a disgraced hedge fund director. I was Dr. Vance, the veteran chief of surgery who had spent 30 years roaming these exact halls. I slipped past the security desk with a simple, authoritative nod. The basement vault of Manhattan General smells like old paper, rubbing alcohol, and cold fluorescent lighting. It's where 50 years of medical history goes to collect dust. I walked past the rows of steel cabinets until I found the section marked External Pathology Consults, Anonymous Archive. My fingers traced the metal tabs until I found the tracking number I'd memorized from the original PDF, Lot 882B. I pulled out the small cardboard box. Inside, tucked away neatly in plastic slots, were 3 small glass slides containing thin, purple-stained cross-sections of liver tissue. I held one up to the harsh light. Even without a microscope, I could see the cellular chaos, the distinct, jagged tiers of vascular wall necrosis. It was the undeniable smoking gun. This wasn't unadjusted data, it was physical, biological proof of a lethal compound. I slipped the slides into my pocket, but I didn't leave the hospital. I needed one more piece of the puzzle, and it wasn't medical. It was financial. I sat down at an old, dusty computer terminal in the doctor's lounge that was still hooked up to a legacy Bloomberg terminal subscription for the hospital's endowment fund. I didn't look at Vanguard's stock. I looked at the clearinghouse data for Julian's short positions. To hide $60 million of insider trading, you have to route the trades through prime brokerages that settle transactions at a specific time. Julian's offshore shorts were scheduled to execute exactly 5 minutes after the opening bell tomorrow, the precise moment the artificially inflated stock would peak before he leaked the adjusted bad news to crash it. He had timed it perfectly to the second. But he made one fatal assumption. He assumed I would take my evidence to the FDA or the SEC. He assumed I would follow the bureaucratic chain of command, a process that takes weeks of red tape while his trade cleared and patients began to fill their prescriptions. He didn't realize that when a surgeon encounters an active hemorrhage, he doesn't file a report. He clamps the artery. The trading floor of the New York Stock Exchange was a boiling cauldron of noise and adrenaline. 5 minutes before the opening bell. Inside the glass VIP balcony overlooking the floor, Julian Cross stood with a champagne flute in his hand, surrounded by his inner circle. Evelyn Reed stood right beside him, her eyes fixed nervously on the massive digital ticker tape displaying the Vanguard Apex symbol. The opening bell rang, a deafening, metallic clang that set the entire floor into a frenzy. Instantly, the stock ticker flashed bright green. Vanguard stock surged by 12% in 30 seconds as the news of the FDA approval hit the algorithmic traders. Julian raised his glass, a cold, triumphant grin spreading across his face. His $60 million short trade was initiating its countdown. In exactly 4 minutes, his offshore brokers would press the button to lock in his fortune. Suddenly, the massive television monitors broadcasting CNBC on the trading floor flickered. The regular anchors vanished, replaced by a live, emergency press conference streaming directly from the steps of the New York State Attorney General's office. There was no press release. There was no bureaucratic delay. I was standing at the microphones, flanked by the head of the FDA's Criminal Investigation Division and the director of the SEC's Enforcement Task Force. In my left hand, I held up a large digital projection of the liver biopsy slides, showing the undeniable cellular necrosis. In my right hand, I held the unredacted IP logs tracking Julian's private Hotmail account directly to the Cayman clearinghouse. The drug is a lethal fraud, my voice echoed through the televisions on the trading floor, calm, authoritative, and devastating. And the insider shorts executed by Vanguard Apex are a matter of criminal record. The reaction on the trading floor was instantaneous. It was like watching a massive cardiac arrest in real time. The shouting stopped, replaced by a collective, horrified gasp as thousands of eyes glued themselves to the television screens. Then came the panic. The bright green ticker symbol for Vanguard Apex didn't just drop, it completely fell off a cliff, turning a bloody, violent red. Up in the glass VIP balcony, Julian's champagne flute slipped from his fingers, shattering on the polished floor. His algorithms had executed the short position, but because the market had completely frozen and halted trading within 60 seconds, his trades never cleared. The $60 million wasn't a profit anymore, it was a digital anchor dragging his entire corporate empire straight into bankruptcy. I watched through the screen as two federal marshals, who had been waiting right outside the VIP suite, walked into the frame and calmly placed Julian and Evelyn in handcuffs. Evelyn looked completely broken, her face buried in her hands. Julian just stared blankly ahead, his white teeth clenched so hard I thought they might crack. They had spent their entire lives trying to master the abstract complexity of the market, completely forgetting the simple, immutable laws of biology and truth. I stepped away from the microphones, pulled off my coat, and walked down the stone steps into the quiet morning air of Manhattan. My 62-year-old knee still ached, and the city felt louder than usual, but for the first time in months, I could breathe normally. Wall Street would spend the next few years picking apart the bones of Vanguard Apex, but that was no longer my concern. The patients were safe, the artery was clamped, and the margin was clean. I hailed a cab, told the driver to take me back to Brooklyn, and smiled. Dr. Arthur Vance was finally going home.